Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Alberto. Thanks to the team of SEMA for organizing this conference. In my opinion, a very important and crucial issue that we are facing at the moment in European industrial relations. First of all, let me explain who we are, because not everybody here is affiliated to us, because you're not all trade union people here. So Industriall Europe is the merged European Federation for industrial trade unions in Europe. We are established in May 2012 out of 3 existing European trade union federations at that time. That is the European Metalworkers Federation, which was the largest one, the biggest one of the 3. The second one was the European Mining, Chemical and Energy Federation, including the chemical sectors, the energy sector, but also pharmaceutical, glass and many other smaller sectors. And the third one was the European Trade Union Federation for Textiles, Clothing and Leather. Altogether, we have 200 affiliated organizations, some big ones, some small ones, and altogether 7 million and more members. If we discuss today the issue of European framework agreements, we cannot not talk about European Works Councils first, because one is linked to the other. European Works Councils is a success story in Europe. Yeah? If we talk about big achievements of the European Commission, big achievements of the European institutions on social issues, then we certainly have to raise the issue of health and safety regulations and other related issues. But on the point of workers' involvement of workers in company strategies and in company decisions, it's surely the issue of European Works Councils. The first directive dates already from 1994, 21 years ago. The revised directive, the recast directive, is from 2009. In the meantime, we have far over 1,000 European Works Council agreements, 1,200, 300. It's a bit unclear because we don't have always the last minute overview. But let's say 1,300. And that means that those 1,300 European Works Councils are meeting every year, sometimes several times, to discuss transnational strategies and to get information and consultation rights. Altogether, Industriall Europe covers about the half of them. 600, 650 of these European Works Council agreements are covered by us. Since 2009, the improvements are important, and that means that there is no doubt anymore when this information and consultation rights of the European Works Councils have to be executed. They have to be executed at the moment when the opinion of the European Works Council still makes sense for the final decision of management. That means that there is no doubt about the fact that the European Works Council should be consulted at the moment when the decision has been taken yet. Yeah? And that the opinion of the European Works Council can still be taken into account. But the definitions are also clear. It's information and consultation. But when you talk about consultation prior to decision, you're very close to negotiation, because you start to negotiate. You develop a second opinion to the management, your opinion, which is maybe different from the management's opinion, and that means that you start to, that you can start a negotiation. And when you start to negotiation, you hope to come to an agreement in one way or another between the two sides, between the two parties. So the step from the European Works Council rights on information and consultation to the point where you can go to an agreement is very easy and very close. Furthermore, And that's what I always have said, also in 1994 already. European Works Council at that time were beginning institutions, councils, yeah, and babies become kids, and kids become teenagers, and teenagers become adults. And when you become adult, you want to do more than when you were a kid. So it's logic that European Works Councils also want to do more now, given the experience they have built up, than what they did 20 years ago. Yeah? So that's also a normal evolution. The point is, are European Works Councils the right place to make agreements? And are the members of the European Works Council the right people to sign such agreements? That's a crucial question, in fact, that we have in many companies. And then you have to go back to what is a European Works Council. The European Works Council is an employee representation body. And in the best case scenario, those employee representatives are all unionized. In the best case scenario for us. But they are not always unionized. And in other words, the European Works Council is not a trade union delegation. They are not delegates there on behalf of the trade unions. No, they are delegates on behalf of the employees. And in some countries, it must be the trade union that nominates the European Works Council members. So then you're normally guaranteed that it's a trade union member, but that's certainly not the case in many other countries, even in Germany, for many points, point of reference as a country, or when it's about working women. But in Germany, it's perfectly possible that the chair of the local Works Council is a non-trade union member, and that this person will become the representative in the European Works Council. The same in Holland. It's perfectly possible that the member in the European Works Council is a non-trade union member. It's an exception, but it happens. We have examples of this. The question is then, if you have a European Works Council, which is partly composed out of European Works Council, of trade union members, and partly out of non-trade union members, how does it work then in a negotiation and in an agreement, yeah, and in signing an agreement? For us, negotiation and signing binding agreements, and I really put the emphasis on the word binding agreements. Binding means for me agreements which have immediate effect on the workers in Europe. Signing such agreements is for us as Industrial Europe a prerogative for trade unions. Fernando already said it before in his introduction. If you look to the national systems of industrial relations, it is up to the trade unions to negotiate agreements and to sign agreements. There are exceptions in countries. It's not always the same, and there are certainly exceptions, but in general, the collective bargaining rights and the right to sign agreements is in most countries a prerogative of trade unions. And that's why we think that we cannot let it over to the European Works Councils only to negotiate and sign agreements. That's not their role. Furthermore, if they would do so, if the European Works Council would sign tomorrow an agreement in good faith, there will be questions in companies covered by this agreement and in countries covered by this agreement about the effect of that agreement in their country and in their companies, because they will not be accepted everywhere, because the agreement has not been signed in accordance with national industrial relations or with national collective bargaining rules and in accordance with national practice and traditions. So we have examples where such agreements are then accepted in some countries, but also not accepted in other countries because it has been signed by somebody who is not legally allowed to negotiate and sign such agreements on behalf of the workers of that company or that country. And we are, I think, at the end of the day, all in agreement when I say that agreements, signing agreements without that have at the end of the day no effect, that this is a useless exercise. I think we all agree, whether we are employer or employee, that agreements that has no effect at the end of the day, yeah, what is the effectiveness, what is the usefulness of that kind of agreement? And that's why we also say that we have a missing link in the system of European social dialogue structure. Because if you go to the 3 levels in Europe where you can meet social partners or where you can sign agreements, you have 3 levels, and that is first of all the intersectoral level, where Business Europe on behalf of the employers and the EQC on behalf of the trade unions, they are, according to the treaty, allowed to sign agreements. And the agreement can then have effect for all the workers in Europe. We have already examples of such agreements. The parental leave agreement, for example, introduced the right for parental leave for all workers in Europe, and that was the result of an agreement between Business Europe and the EQC. That's legally possible. I'm not going now into the legal issues. There is next to me a lawyer who can explain it much better than me, but believe me, it's legally possible. The same for sectoral social dialogues. We have in Europe at the moment 43 sectors where the employers from this sector and the trade unions from the sector are meeting regularly under the supervision of the Commission, and also there you can make agreements, statements, joint positions and so on, which have then also an effect on the workers. One of the recent cases was a so-called hairdressers agreement, which was then at the end not accepted by the Commission, but that's another issue. I'm not going into that detailed point, but there are examples of agreements at sector level with effect on workers in that sector. And the missing link is that on the 3rd level, the company level, we don't have any legal framework to do such a thing. And that's what we need. We need a legal framework. For the moment, and Fernando explained that very well, it's all there is a lot going on, but there is no legal framework at the moment that defines who has to do what. The only thing what we have at company level is the European Works Council. That's regulated. But as I explained to you, that's part of the business. That's the information and consultation part of the business. That's regulated. That's the European Works Council. No doubt about that, and they are doing great work. But it's not enough to discuss this only. We also need to discuss who have other rights, which are also rights for workers, and that's the negotiation right, and that's the signing right, to sign collective agreements, to sign binding agreements. Well, there we don't have yet a clarity, and therefore we need at the European level a transnational framework for company level agreements. And then, let me make my point very clear here. For us, it's clear that this is a prerogative for the trade unions to do that, not in competition with the European Works Council, but in cooperation with the European Works Council. Well, this whole introduction covers a little bit what I've put here on the first slide. So we have a trade union debate on company level negotiations. And the European Works Councils are seen by us as, first of all, the information and consultation bodies. Extremely important bodies that play a role in transnational restructuring, in many other subjects or topics or events that can happen in a transnational company. But the collective bargaining and the negotiation rights, they are a trade union prerogative, as I already repeatedly said. Yeah? But there must be a cooperation between the two. That's also the case what happens at national level. You have a cooperation between works councils and trade unions, and everybody has his role and everybody has his right. But when it comes to European company level agreements, our basic principle is that it's Industriall Europe that signs an agreement on behalf of the trade unions. So if you want to make sure as employer, if you want to make sure as company that the agreement that you negotiate will have an effect for all your workers and will not be questioned by somebody or by a trade union or by a specific group in a country, if you want to make sure that your agreement is then also implementable, I'm not sure about this word, whether it's correct English, but I think we all understand what I want to say, then it's better to go for the procedure to the European, through the European trade unions, because then you can be sure that your agreement will be of effect for your workers in Europe. We had a long debate about that, how we can go to it, but the point was that we established a procedure in 2006 already in Industrial Europe on how trade unions can give mandates to the European Federation, because the point was, okay, we all agree that a European Trade Union Federation should be able to negotiate on behalf of the European trade unions in that company with a certain transnational company on a certain subject. We all agree that it should be possible, but what kind of procedure do we establish to make sure that the mandate is given in the right way and that the European Federation has the mandate? Well, this is the mandate that we have established, but it's a summary, because the mandate procedure is about 3 pages in detail. But what we say is, first of all, if we are able to negotiate a European framework agreement, a European agreement with a transnational company, then we should first of all inform all the trade unions involved in that company in Europe, as well the small ones as the big ones. So everybody should be, in a transparent way, be informed about the possible negotiation. The second step is that we receive from these unions the mandate to negotiate. It's like in your own company or in your own trade union. If you have a transnational company with 5 establishments or with more establishments in your country, not everybody will be around the negotiation table. You will mandate people to negotiate on behalf of all these plants, on behalf of all these trade unions, on behalf of all these workers. Well, also here, we need to get the mandate as Industrial Europe from our trade unions in that company to negotiate on their behalf in a European company. Well, the rule that we have here is that we ask unanimity from all the countries involved in the negotiation. If not, a 2/3 majority in each country. And the 2/3 means the 2/3 of the trade unions. And each country has different rules, and we don't intervene in that, and different practices to define what does it mean 2/3 majority to give a yes for to a mandate for negotiation. But it's clear that we need to get a green light from each country to start the negotiations. If one country says no, then we will not start the negotiations. Because why don't we do that? Because we cannot guarantee to our counterpartner, the employers, that when we sign an agreement that it will be implementable and it be implemented in all the countries in Europe. So if one country says yes, says no, we will not start the negotiations, except, that's a little exception in our mandate procedure, if that country does not represent more than 5% of the workforce in Europe. If it's a really small country, well, then we say, okay, even if you disagree, we will still go on, because your importance in the group in Europe is too low to block a negotiation. And then step 3 and step 4 is, we start to negotiate, we inform continuously about the next steps. We consult about the decision, and we consult about the outcome, and then we decide. And there, the decision, or whether or not we accept the outcome of these negotiations, must be with a 2/3 majority in each country. And when we get that, then we can sign the agreement. And then every trade union involved must also accept that agreement. That's the guarantee we give to the employers. Because the company doesn't negotiate with us if they don't have the guarantee that when they sign with us an agreement that it will be implemented in all countries. So even if one union says no, but it's not 1/3 in its country, that union will also have to accept the outcome of that transnational agreement. So, and then we sign the agreement and we implement the agreement. And it might be that this European agreement might then need to be translated into a national agreement. But because that's also the weak point at the moment, if we have a binding European agreement and you want to implement it in a national agreement, there is no automatic implementation. What you need to do then is to transform that into a national collective agreement in accordance with the national law or legislation or practices, because there is no automatic implementation of such a European agreement. So that's another reason why we need a European legal framework. So this is, in short, the procedure. Here you can find a number of companies where we have such signed agreements. So these agreements are signed through Industriall Europe with the company and have been implemented. And I can only repeat what Fernando said earlier. Most of these companies are French. Only one in our sector is German. It is a group elevator where we signed an agreement in 2012 on health and safety. But for the rest, it's mostly French. Yeah. The implementation is very diverse. I'm not going into detail because the timing is too short. But we have also, after the signing, activities on the implementation with regularly meetings with the company management and so on. What are the lessons that we can take from this? First of all, I think we need to have clear principles on this, but we also have to be pragmatic, and one of the points of pragmatism is the role of European Works Council. For example, for a number of people in our federation, it was unacceptable that the European Works Council would co-sign such an agreement, because the European Works Council is not a trade union. So it should be only Industriall Europe that signs on behalf of the trade unions. In the meantime, we evolved already to a structure or to a practice where co-signing of the European Works Council President or the Senate Committee is okay, as long as it is clear that it's an agreement between Industriall Europe and the company. Secondly, the participation of the European Works Council members in the negotiation is a little bit a more critical point. If the European Works Council member is nominated by his trade union as the trade union representative in the negotiation team, then it's fine. But as such, an automatic participation of the European Works Council in the negotiation would give the wrong sign to the management. That's why we are still on that point pretty clear and straightforward. Another point is that these European company level negotiations can only be successful if they are not in contradiction with national systems. That's why we make so much the link in our procedure also with national systems of collective bargaining and negotiation. In our practice, we don't have, as far as I could see, no agreement in a company where there was not an existing European Works Council. So the role of the European Works Council, even if they if they are not a co-signing partner or not the crucial partner to sign, the role of the European Works Council is nevertheless important. I said it already, the leading role played by the European industry federations. A strong and well-unionized European Works Council is an added value, that's also clear. And last but not least, it is an important sign that we do it in such a way to the employers and to the EU institutions, because in 2005 and in 2006 we had several times to hear that trade unions would never be possible to mandate a European Trade Union Federation to negotiate on their behalf. Well, we have shown the opposite. We are able to mandate our European Trade Union Federation to negotiate on behalf of the national trade unions. Last but not least, restructuring was raised by Fernando as well. Indeed, restructuring, transnational restructuring is one of those topics where we should have much more European framework negotiations and agreements. Because what happens in transnational restructuring is that the company launches a plan and some of the companies and some of the countries will gain employment and some of the countries will lose employment. So if you don't have a coordinated approach there, you risk to be played off against each other and you risk to be in competition with each other. So for trade unions, and now I speak on certainly from the trade union point of view, it is crucial that in cases of transnational company restructuring, we make full use of this possibility for European framework agreements, because it's there that you can make a framework which then can be of benefit for each and individual company or country. So restructuring should be, and transnational restructuring should be much more a topic where we start to have European framework negotiations with companies. And actually we are working on this now, this year. That's one of the core businesses for our agenda this year, is to come up with a clear policy on that. And by the end of the year we will have a company policy conference in Brussels where we will launch our political views on company restructuring and the way also how we have to deal then with these European framework agreements. So thanks for the invitation. I hope that my story was a little bit understandable and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.